Uh, Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another instalment of Ben Gray's Bristol Spotlight YouTube channel, magazine expose, exposing the uh, corruption and brutality and criminal venality at the heart of the Bristol judiciary, CPS and the police, the England Somerset Constabulary, and including all the way down to London and across the UK effectively. In this current installment, I'm going to deal with this character here, a person called Alex Chapman, who's a solicitor who works for Janes Solicitors in London. Um, I think fairly famous. The name rings a bell. I had to contact London solicitors because I'm not getting any representation. No firms will represent me anywhere on the Western Circuit, which is basically Bristol all the way down to Plymouth and Exeter, basically the entire West Country, and over the River Severn to Cardiff. None of these firms who I've required and needed for representation as a defendant in the criminal proceedings will act for me. This means that I'm forced to try London solicitors to try and represent my basic human right to have legal representation. And I get put through to this Mr. Chapman, having already spoken to the secretary, and this video will just give a flavour of Mr. Chapman can represent the sort of as a sort of a character who as I say, completely represents the extent of venality. And this little vignette, these few exchanges that I've had with Mr. Chapman, he spoke to me all of a couple of minutes, rams home what not just what a venal, crooked, slimy, blood-stained crook this Mr. Chapman personally is, but how he represents and speaks of his behaviour speaks to the venality and crookedness and viciousness of the legal fraternity or the legal firmament, as currently I experience it as somebody who's campaigning to expose this kind of villainy at the heart of the criminal justice system. So my situation is I've spoken to the briefly to the receptionist, and I'll play an excerpt from my initial exchanges with the secretary for Janes Solicitors, or the receptionist. And she answers the phone, and I ask her, as you will just hear in a moment, whether or not she does legal aid and criminal legal aid, to which she says they do, and she puts me through to Mr. Chapman. So I'll just pause here and play that just a few moments with the receptionist to get a bearing on what happens next. Oh, hi there. I'm just wondering, do you do legal aid criminal matters? Oh, great. I'm trying to find representation for a matter for several charges, assaulting emergency workers, times 4 or 5, I think, and public order, racially aggravated. And so after the having been put through to Mr. Chapman, I then explained to him how I'm unable to get representation anywhere in the Western Circuit, and have try need therefore to get a firm from London. There will be no issue with legal aid, because if I cannot get representation, so that the firm cannot provide an agent under the terms of legal aid, a firm will get travel costs to travel wherever that solicitor needs to go, I think, within England and Wales, provided that they can verify that that there is nobody that can act nearer, even if it's an agent from another firm, in the interests of that defendant. So that's not going to be a problem. But you will see, um, having there being no dispute in terms of legal aid or that being an issue, Mr. Chapman asked me whether or not I am paying privately or from legal aid, and I'll pause again to play a few brief couple of minutes of Mr. Chapman's speaking to me on that topic. Yes, yes, and racially aggravated public order. Well, basically, I was originally arrested on 29th of November 21. I was charged on the I think the 2nd of December. I was remanded for a couple of weeks by the magistrates. I asked for the Crown Court to grant me bail, which they did. So I've been on bail since then, on conditional. I've got a tag, so I've got an exclusion zone. And it's facing trial on the 17th of November with the next case management hearing on the 10th of October. Sorry, not November, October, 10th and 17th of October. No, I haven't had any representation in this case, even after arrest. Yeah, I have a lot of issues. I've sort of been involved with the criminal, the police, and the courts since I moved to Bristol in 2006, five, six, and I've complained about some firms. I did feel myself. I had no choice but to citizens arrest a barrister called Edward Hetherington from Albion Chambers in 2015. And was convicted of false imprisonment of that barrister, and I had a restraining order. Well, he's a I just consider him a CPS crony. I mean, the main issue. Well, no, I mean, it's all part of my case, so I'm happy to have any ears that want to listen up to it. But it's the specific issue about representation, because this is where it's probably the most pressing thing for you in finance. Is that I've got a restraining because of the restraining order involving three barristers, two of whom are either judges or recorders. No Western Circuit firm will represent me because they need to use Albion Chambers, or they do use Albion Chambers, which is where these barristers come from. So that's basically excluded any form of representation, and even the firm, the duty solicitors, withdrew from representing me, and even though I hadn't never used them, they've heard of me enough to not even get involved at the police station stage. So it was originally going to be transferred to London or to one of the other circuits. That was Judge Laurie's provisional decision in January, and he's flipped on that, and he's now said he's not going. He doesn't want it to be transferred, and is staying in. Well, he said that the provisional reason was that the other circuits wouldn't take the case, but so it's staying in Gloucester for the moment, and it's listed for trial. But obviously, at the moment there is involvement of a presiding judge. I'm in communications with the original court, Bristol Crown Court, even though the incident happened in Bristol Crown Court, where the presiding judge is considering whether to transfer it to because she hasn't been involved, but Mrs. Justice Cutts should have been involved in the original decision to transfer. But at the moment, I need to get if I can get representation, then I'm sure the representation could assist with transfer anyway, because if that's an issue. I am on legal aid. I'm absolutely brassic. I have no money. I'm on universal credit. I don't understand what sort of cases are there, because I asked the lady, did you do legal aid, before she put me through to you, and she said you did. But I mean, my position is that my rights. I mean, the injustice of my being, leave alone all the details of the case, the injustice of my being. I mean, Judge Laurie was well aware that I had problems with representations in the Western Circuit, which is why presumably he originally decided to transfer it. I mean, so the issue isn't even to do with transfer. It's to do it's too low level, which of course I told you what the charges were, but even before I was patched through to you, because you shouldn't be wasting my time. Because obviously, if I'm already facing, I've already been involved for many weeks of my life in making submissions to the court, in attending hearings, in remand, and I obviously don't want to have my life sucked away just chasing shadows, because you're not the first solicitor I've rung today about this matter. If you knew that it was what the charges were, why didn't you say that from the outset? I'm just a bit curious. No, yeah, but that's, as I say, that's a separate issue, because I thought you said that you just listed. You said you only do legal aid for murder, rape, and serious fraud. So you wouldn't have so the travel has nothing to do with it, because this wasn't. This is sorry. No, I told the lady that put me through. I said, "Do you do legal aid?" Well, I assume that she would have told you, but in any event, I mean, obviously that's the first, because I told you what the charges were. So if you because it was well, yeah, but I'm just trying to find out if you've done that deliberately, because if you knew what I mean, you certainly knew. Hang on, you knew what the charges were initially. No, we're not. You're not. No, because if you're harassing me, then I shouldn't be able to harass you back. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is Alex Chapman at work, in quotation marks. Hopefully, I don't have to explain or sell my case to you that Mr. Chapman is a venal, lying scoundrel and crook. These injuries here that you see up on your screen that are being inflicted by the local police officers, or local security guards, or locals with collusion of the local police, that those are all going on. These are all taking place, and these attacks from police officers that you can see coming up on your screen, thanks to people like Mr. Chapman, because he is a solicitor who is supposed to be representing the rights of accused, which includes, obviously, in many cases, counter allegations against the police, and in theory, even the court. And he will represent, as he's made clear during this phone call, convicted rapists, convicted murderers, convicted child abusers, convicted fraudsters. Serious offences will be represented by this firm on legal aid, so he will bother to fit in a legal aid form if the case is of that seriousness. But in my case, he won't represent that person unless they can pay cash up front. He will not represent them on legal aid. They can go hang, they can fight for themselves, fend for themselves in court, even when, as is my case, I cannot get, it is totally acknowledged by all parties and the court that I cannot get legal representation anywhere in the Western Circuit, which is why I need to apply to London to have my basic Article 6 right to legal representation, statute right to those who cannot afford it to be have representation made for them. And this man, Chapman, who earns a living from upholding the Human Rights Act, earns a living, is paid handsomely. He's got enough spare cash from the taxpayer and privately to spend his time arguing with me, or inviting me into a conversation, when he's made it clear from the outset that he could not represent me, because I made it clear, as you heard at the beginning of this conversation, beginning of this phone call, to the receptionist that I spoke to, who I told immediately that I was looking for legal aid work, for representation for the following triable either way offences. And and according to Mr. Chapman, it's not procedure or protocol for the receptionist to know the basic rule. There's no point in patching them through if they were looking for legal aid and less serious offences, because the firm has a policy of, according to Mr. Chapman in this phone call, has a policy of not representing those who fit my category, which is the category that I told the receptionist. And you hear his sarcastic, facetious comment that, well, I'm not the lady who you told the information to, as if he is completely distinct from the receptionist, and as if in any event he didn't think to ask when I told him that there were less serious offences. Again, at the beginning of the conversation, he was obviously going to come at some stage to the issue of whether he was going to be able to stuff his pockets, which is all he's really interested in, nothing to do with fighting fearlessly for the principle of justice or for right or a cause. And he's got no concern or compassion that he's leaving me to that my rights as a defendant will be are being violated by me not having my statute right to representation. No concern as to the distress it's caused me to lead me on, sucker me in for a whole 6 minutes of conversation when it was, and to relive the trauma of being harassed, of my own allegations of being the accused in a distressing situation such as the case that I was involved with. And the sarcastic at the end of the conversation, well, I'm sorry to have wasted your time, where he makes it quite clear he's not the slightest bit sorry, because he was intentionally wasting my time, because he refused to, he claims not to have been told by the receptionist that I was not entitled to not going to get legal aid for his firm, and didn't think to ask me when I mentioned that they were low-level offences. So he must have known from the outset that he wasn't going to be able to. He was going to refuse representation, and yet strings me along. So he's actually subjecting me, I would argue, to criminal harassment. He's causing me harassment, alarm, and distress. Certainly, by being forced to relive unnecessarily this case and waste my time having to explain the situation about the case to him, when at the end of the day he was already never going to represent me, because he claims that the firm doesn't deal, even if there's a just cause or a concern that justice will not be done in that regard. So the whole thing effectively a conspiracy, which of course the police and the CPS in Bristol, which is where my case was being heard, can make hay, because they can exploit the fact that I cannot get representation, so that I'll just be delivered into their hands to make it a completely unfair situation, where the barrister will be strongly connected to the judge in a case, because they will be from the same chambers or similar chambers to each other, so they're effectively part of a club already. And I'm even more ostracised from the imbalance, because even when I go to London firms seeking for representation for the Western Circuit to help me in a case, I haven't committed an offence serious enough for me to get any help. And so, if you look at, ladies and gentlemen, if you think of the imbalance that Mr. Chapman is involved with, on the one hand, he has he will represent murderers and rapists, as I say. He will represent, even if they are convicted, he will get legal aid, and he will go to the appeals court and provide documents and cost the taxpayer a huge amount of money, of billable hours, for him to represent somebody who's already been before a jury and convicted of some heinous offence like fraud or rape, and he will fight fearlessly, and if the single judge refuses, he will potentially go to the full court and involve even more taxpayers' expense. And of course, there will be a judge at a hearing, or three judges indeed, and a barrister and court clerks and everybody waiting hand and foot on the rights to be considered of somebody who has already been found guilty in a criminal court, often when they're not even appealing the conviction, but simply the extent of sentence, that the sentence was too harsh. Then the defence barrister will pursue the matter, even if there's no dispute that he has raped a child or she has killed somebody, or whoever the defendant is. Their rights are protected, and this man, Mr. Chapman, will fearlessly defend those. Somebody who is accused of what is already accepted as a much lower level allegation or charge. Somebody who is accused of something that, compared to child abuse or rape or fraud or murder, is hardly worth even considering in terms of summary or tribal, either way matters, not even in the same planet in terms of type of seriousness. I need hardly stress, and yet because it's not serious, I cannot get representation. No lawyer will, as far as that, because Mr. Chapman is one of dozens of solicitors that I've contacted in London who are saying the same thing. Bearing in mind, I cannot already get representation anywhere in the Western Circuit. And so the treble injustice that because it's not serious enough, Mr. Chapman won't waste his time and deign to try and defend my rights and leave me at the mercy of the state and all the resources and even the complainants themselves are powerful and wealthy, or relatively compared to me on benefits, wealthy members of the police force and already part of a large gang of people or group of people compared to the individual me. As if it wasn't imbalanced enough, Mr. Chapman swoops in to finish the death or deliver the death blow into ensuring that I have the most unfair and biased chances before the courts. Bearing in mind also that if I'm unrepresented, this creates, or it would ordinarily create, disruption for the court and lengthen the court process and therefore cost the taxpayer far more in terms of having to pay for all the extra time or potential extra problems created by somebody who is unrepresented, which is obviously part of the advantage of having representation. Bearing in mind, I haven't even had the legal advice that you're entitled to when you've been arrested at a police station, to have a lawyer present and to advise you in terms of relative allegations or what the allegations are about or what to tell the police at interview. I've already been denied that. I was denied representation in order to obtain bail from Judge Laurie at Gloucester Crown Court. And as I say, Mr. Chapman is there effectively to serve entirely the prosecution and to kowtow to their power and come up with this. And of course, just as the final point to this scoundrel, just to emphasize what a liar he is, assuming that he's not even lying about the policy around serious allegations being only serious allegations being represented by legal aid, or his firm will only apply for legal aid if it's serious. But he then says, initially said, well, this be the geography of the case. So that had nothing to do with anything. He'd already said he couldn't represent me because of the fact that I wasn't charged with serious offences, and therefore he wasn't going to. He doesn't. They have a policy of not getting. So having already established that, when I tried to question him on that, he then talks this nonsense about the geography of the case being in Bristol or Gloucester, but effectively starting in Bristol and only 10 miles away. So he's just casually fabricating a complete deflection, or he's also indicates he's lying about the issue about legal aid, and that he just concocted or fabricated this nonsense about legal aid only for serious cases in order just to wash his hands of me, because I've told him that I have problems getting representation here, and he's looking at me as a problem rather than a problem for him, rather than any possibility that I'm a human being entitled to legal representation and not getting representation. And bearing in mind that all the representation that is offered and freely available to the most heinous offenders, but somebody who's presumed innocent and who's therefore most in need of representation in a case that's already skewed against him in terms of who the complainants are and so on and so forth. So I hope you see in this utter venal slug. As I say, he's representative. I hope that the point that I'm making here is that you might all feel completely safe and confident that you will have representation and you will not be in my situation if ever accused or ever brought before the courts, and that those who are regularly or have that sort of issue live in that world where that is an ongoing potential and have been and potentially likely to be involved in further sort of proceedings, criminal or civil. The point here is that Mr. Chapman represents all our rights, and if he can do it to me, he can do it to anybody as and when he pleases. bearing in mind the extent to which he's harassing me. He's deliberately spinning me out, spinning me a yarn in terms of offering the potential of representation, and when he's got no intention of doing so from the outset. The money that he's got available to have the time available, free time of an expensive law firm that charges, £100 an hour, whether you're legal aid or not, and he's got all the money that he's making from not representing other people. He's using the money that the public are paying him effectively to protect the rights of the public and ensure those who are accused of offences are properly and fearlessly represented against the power and might of the state. And he's given that effectively entrusted with that completely holy calling and sacred calling, and he completely urinates all over it and spits on it by using the money that he's got for that calling to actually completely shaft, completely skewer, completely, utterly violate the rights of a well-meaning and naturally deeply concerned accused person who has come to him in total good faith to offer him the opportunity to earn more hundreds of billable hours, in which he, as a solicitor, he will hardly be involved anyway. He could possibly get hold of folders and perhaps type up a statement or two from me, and the rest of the time is handed over to a barrister. He doesn't even have to, and there are secretaries to draw out the statements and so forth. So it's not as if he's being sent down the mines to break coal at incredible risk to his life. All he has to do is the same as he would do for any defendant that has come to him, any accused person. So all I can say is God help us all, because this is the sort of filth that you have effectively running the country and holding the entire criminal justice system to account. So I hope you join in with me in agreeing with me that this man should be the one in the dock, certainly, and the fact that he's not, and the fact that he's going about his business inflicting great harm on myself particularly, and doubtless many other defendants who are obviously at the bottom of the social scale, then as I say, then God help us all.